of contracting the cancer. I started out, it is the cancer that they diagnosed was Merkel cell carcinoma. And it was a local dermatologist that diagnosed it, had biopsied, and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And after he told me what was going on, he asked if I could go to Cleveland in the next morning, because they were going to do grand rounds. Grand rounds is where the doctors, and the university hospital is a teaching hospital. And so therefore, there were doctors there from university, from the Cleveland Clinic, and from Metro in Cleveland. There were pretty close to 30 student doctors that came, and it was just a little pimple on the top of my head. And they all came, and only 2 of them recognized that it was Merkel. So anyway, the next day, or that day, Dr. Cooper, who is the director of dermatology at University Hospital and also at Case Western Reserve Medical School, they said he wanted to see me within 2 weeks. Just call, make an appointment. So I called the next day, and the secretary said, "You can't see Dr. Cooper with only 2 weeks' notice. It takes longer than that." I said, "Well, I have Merkel cell carcinoma. Can you be here tomorrow morning?" They said. So that's when it all started, and several instances since then. They did surgery, took it off, and a week later, when the biopsy came back from the bone, it was questionable. So I had to go back in, and then they scraped my scalp, and then they took a flap of skin from the top of my head and flipped it around to the front, and let it heal for a year. Actually, I had a mound of skin up there, and then they cut that off, and everything was going fine. And except about 6 months later, no, it was when they decided that I should have radiation, chemotherapy, and also surgery. Usually for cancer, they'll do one of those 3 things. They did all 3. And they determined that they might have to scrape some more off, but it turned out that they didn't. But one day when I went in, I had radiation and chemo. That night, in the middle of the night, I had a heart attack, which gave me a helicopter ride to downtown. And they put a couple stents in and sent me home. Well, then, about 2 years ago, they said I had another different kind of skin cancer, and it was on my jaw and on the top of my head, so they took that off. And now they're trying to get something to grow back. It's still, if I take my bandage off, you can see my scalp. I also am unique in that after all that, I developed Parkinson's disease. And I was seeing the surgeon in Geneva, and he had a student, doctor, an intern, and he said, "This man is a walking medical encyclopedia because of all the things that they also took my colon out, and just a few extra things. And it did gain me another helicopter ride downtown, because in 2 days they gave me 12 units of blood and 3 units of plasma, and they said, "We can't keep doing this." And so we all knew that Merkel is a very aggressive cancer, but I had 2 oncologists, which are cancer doctors, and they left, and I have a new one. And he said, "Do you realize that with Merkel cell, we usually only see 2 years? Would be all the longer. But I've gone 7. Now with the Parkinson's, that affects the nerves and the muscles and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the hardest thing to deal with. I'm a little slower. I don't drive anymore. I can drive. I have a driver's license, and the doctor said I could. But I found myself, just like a few minutes ago when I forgot what I was saying, that if I were driving and that would happen, well, you know, and I would hate to hurt somebody else. So that's really a challenge, but we can still travel. We were in Colorado earlier this week for graduation of my granddaughter. So you can live with it. One thing it does, if somebody wants to talk to you about cancer and you allow them to talk, that makes it easier on them. If I talk to different people about cancer and what's going on, it's a way to release some of the spent up. We have a very good friend who developed cancer in his foot. He was diabetic, like I'm diabetic also. And they finally had to remove his foot. And he lasted another 6 or 8 months. But he was able to drive, he was able to do all these things, and I can still do that. But I just don't want to hurt anybody else. Well, I was on the school board for 24 years, and I think that was quite an achievement. There's only one other one, that person that I know has gone more than 24 years, Mr. Nicely, and I think he went 27. So I was involved in that. I'm still very involved with the Scouts. I still quite often, in a year's time, can see 8 or 10 Scouts working on required merit badges for Eagle. I am an Eagle, and my Eagle card was signed by President Harry Truman in 1952. And I just figured you've got to give back for what you got. The schools in Madison gave me my education, and I'm trying to repay. Just take it one day at a time. And like when I was doing radiation and chemo, it's an all-day affair. And my wife and I would go, and I would look around. Excuse me. I could look around, and there were so many people that were so much worse off than me. So appreciate what the good Lord has done for me. He ain't ready for me to come home. Probably the most scary thing that I did was when they made the mask of my face and head, and I would lay on the radiation table, and there were 3 bolts on each side of this mask, so I couldn't move my head. They radiated it from 3 different angles, but the settings on the machine were all set up and all done. But I was telling my family doctor about it, being upset, scared. So he gave me a little pill, and when we got to Martin Luther King Drive, I'd take that little pill, and it was only to take the edge off. But that machine it's awesome. It's awesome. The doctor that I had, the radiation doctor, he had a photographic memory. And when we interviewed him the first day, he talked to me about half an hour, and he went back to his office and he wrote 8 pages of what we had talked about. And anytime we saw him every 6 months after the 25 radiation treatments, he would ask about our grandchildren, what the score of the hockey games were, just to make us all relaxed. Depressed? Yeah, sometimes I get a little depressed. And the family kind of suffers because sometimes I'm not the nicest person in the world. But we work at it. Because we've been married 53 years, and that's not bad. But I guess one of the other things that I enjoy doing probably the most is pushing Madison. I love my town. And I was telling Corey about my mother, who graduated from North Madison High School. It was an 11-year school, and so she's an alumnus of Madison. Then she went uptown and got on the streetcar, and she could either go back to Madison Village or she would go to Geneva. She chose to go to Geneva. She had a sister that lived there, and so she was an alumnus of Geneva also. But the house we're in here, my grandfather built in 1927, and I've lived here. We moved in 1947. It was so nice because down here we had running water and flush toilets. Up in Route 20, where McDonald's is the house was the house I was born in. And I was telling somebody a story about during the Second World War. They were working on the telegraph poles, and in front of the house, and my mother went out to the outhouse, and the electrician on the pole, started hollering out, "I know where you're going." I thought that was a funny story. But I had one brother was in the Air Force, another one was in the Navy, and my third brother was in the Army. And Barb's and my son was in the Air Force, and our other son was in the Navy, and I got in the Army. And Barb's and my son was in the Air Force, and our other son was in the Navy, and I got to take 2 overnight cruises on his ship out in the Atlantic. And the other, David was, he was in the aggressors when they were doing war games. The pilots would fly in, even in Russian formation, and he was a crew chief on one of the planes. So we're pretty proud of our kids. And I want to thank you for interviewing me. It's an honor to be talking with you.